I'm going to do a demo here with a painting that I had already done as a demo in a workshop. But now what I want to do is I want to go in and bring out the sky color again. Right now the sky has become a little bit greenish because I had done a light blue sky color to begin with and then painted over it, did a bunch of leaves and greens. And at the end, I demonstrated how to glaze a painting, which is a very translucent layer of paint mixed with clear acrylic medium or glazing fluid to just warm up the whole piece. So in this case, I used like a yellow mixed with a glazing medium and just glazed the whole painting to bring out the nice warmth in the piece. But now I want to go back in and bring my blues back in again, because adding that yellow glaze onto a light blue made that background seem a little bit greenish. To create this painting in my demo during the workshop I did, which was just an introduction to acrylic painting, I used what I call my desert island palette. So that's quinacridone rose, cadmium yellow light, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and titanium white. With those 5 colors, that's my standard palette, and I feel like I can, for the most part, create anything I need. Sometimes though, you know, I might need a warmer blue or a warmer yellow or a warmer red to my palette, depending on what I'm working on. If I'm working on a painting with a lot of greens, sometimes I'll add greens into them. So it can really vary based on the painting, but I prefer to use a limited palette. And that's why these 5 desert island colors are the colors that I use in most of my classes. And sometimes it'll change. Things change over time. But right now, and for the last few years, these have been my desert island colors. So I'm going to remove the red and the brown. We won't need them for this demo. In fact, we probably won't need the yellow either, but I'll just keep that handy just in case. And I'm going to be using the blue and the white to create the blue sky back in here. Now, I'm using a paper palette. This one happens to be a Gray Matters paper palette, and it's gray on one side. That's the shiny side. You always want to use the shiny side on a paper palette. And these are helpful because it helps you find the value of your color. If your color is lighter than this gray, which is about 50% gray, then I know that my color is going to be in the right direction. If I was trying to mix darker values, I'd want it to be darker than this 50% gray. Now, and I don't always use this. A lot of times I use a white, but you use what tool works best for you. In terms of brushes, I'm going to be doing a dry brushing technique to bring the sky back out so I can maintain that softness of the background where it looks really fluffy and kind of blurry. That's what we call soft edges. That's one part of soft edges. And so I want to create soft edges, and I'm going to need to do dry brushing for that because I am painting with acrylics. So I like to use a white synthetic brush in a filbert shape. Filbert being kind of flattened, but it has this rounded tip. And I don't want it to be too wishy-washy. So I don't want a watercolor brush. I want something that has a little bit of give to it so that it'll be nice to dry brush with. And this brush here is obviously a bright, but I just am putting it in because I want to show different brands, because people always ask me about what brands I like. My very favorite brand is Connoisseur, but they are not being produced anymore. So if you're able to find one or you happen to have one, I like this pure synthetic filbert. The 2106 is the product number. It's a burgundy handle, and I like those because they're quite stiff. They also make a synthetic mongoose that I really love. I don't have one right here right now. This is a white Taklon filbert. It's a little too wishy-washy for me. So that one I'm going to put aside. I would not use that. My second favorite brush is a Royal Langnickel. And you have to be careful to make sure you get the brush that you like the most. I like a higher quality, not a craft brush necessarily, although some craft brushes are quite lovely. I personally like just something that's a little bit higher quality where no bristles are going to fall out. If the bristles fall out, then I want to be careful. And these Royal Langnickel, it's a Vienna. It's got kind of this matte orange long handle, are quite nice. This one obviously is flat. I'm going to put that one aside. It would be more something like this. But that's a bigger size than I want, so I'm going to put that one aside. This yellow one is, again, a bright shape, but it's yellow and it's called Cheap, C-H-E-E-P, and it's really inexpensive. So those are a great option for students. There's also the Da Vinci Top Acryl and a Isabi Isacryl. Those are 2 really great brushes as well. So I might end up using one of those because I have a good size, so I'll just throw that Da Vinci one in there. I think that's one I'll use today. And really, I do have tools that I like more than others, but you know, you kind of get to know what you like over time. So playing around with different tools is very important. Now let's lay out the color, shall we? I don't need as much blue because I really want this to be a light blue, but I want to make sure I don't put out so little color that I'm then struggling later to have to remix. Once I lay out my color, my palette knife comes into play because I like to use a palette knife for mixing. And so I know that my color is going to be lighter than 50% gray. I'm going to start with white and grab quite a bit. I'm using the bottom flat edge to drag some over. Just going to wipe off my brush or palette knife every time I wipe or work. I wipe it off with it. I'm using a blue towel. It's just a shop towel I get at my local hardware store. I'm going to put a little bit of blue in there and see where we go from there. So I'm going to start there. I want to make sure I make a nice big batch so I don't have to mix again later. And I already can tell this color is a little darker than I want, so I'm going to add some more white. Now, one thing with the ultramarine blue, when you mix it, to me, and color temperature is a whole other ball of wax we're not going to get into in this video, but to me, ultramarine blue is a cool blue, and when I add white to it, it just gets really frosty looking. I personally am in the camp that says cerulean blue is a warmer blue, but you know, there's no consensus and there's no standard out there. So really it's what you feel that works for you. Now, when I put in my ultramarine blue with white and mix it together, you can see it's quite a cool blue that leans a little bit towards purple. I might add a tiny speck of yellow. I've got to be careful. Like, I'm just going to touch my palette with that yellow. I've got to be really careful because if I add too much yellow, I'm going to mix green. So I'm just going to take a tiny dot. So you can barely see any on there. I'm going to tap it off on my paper towel just to make sure I don't have too much and add it to that blue. Just dot at a time until I feel like I get the color that I want. That's not yellow and not green, but just warming up that blue just the tiniest bit. And for me, anytime I add white to any color, I always ask myself, do I need a bit of yellow? Because white itself is a very cold color temperature, and it's going to make everything very cool the minute you add it to any color. It's going to dull down the color a smidge, and it's really going to cool that color temperature down. So I'm always asking myself, should I add a little yellow? For me, yellow is the color I use to warm things up with, not red. So that's why, for me, that cerulean blue, which is closer to yellow on the color wheel than ultramarine blue, is the warmer blue. So that looks good enough to me. I used 3 tiny dots of that yellow with a whole bunch of white, almost that whole batch of white. I've got a nice little pool. Now I just want to make sure I corral it into the smallest little area I can, scraping up everything I can reach around it so that I don't waste. But hey, part of painting sometimes is about a little bit of waste, as much of a bummer as it is. I'm gonna take my brush and just kind of wipe off, salvaging as much as I can from that palette knife. I'm just going to make sure I clean off that palette knife so it remains nice and clean and fresh for next use. Put it away. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my blue and I'm going to really push and wiggle my brush into it. I talk about this a lot, so I'm going to reestablish it, push and wiggle, turn it over and push and wiggle. When I want thin layers, I want that buildup to be inside and out of that brush. But then I'm going to wipe off the outer layers a little bit. I don't want any thick, goopy paint. So hopefully you can see that, and I'll do it on top of the red here. It's not too thick and goopy, but it's got paint right down inside. Now I'm going to start reestablishing my blues. So I'm going to start by going over top of my blue areas, and I'm just feathering it in. And wherever I touch another area, so I start in the middle where I have the most paint, I feather over the edges of the other colors. And I don't want to get rid of all of that greenish background because it makes it feel like there are some more leaves and such going on in there. So every time I finish working with it, I push and wiggle again, maybe wipe off a little bit on the edge, being careful to start in the middle of the area that I want to do, and then dry brush softly. I'm barely touching the canvas here. In fact, I can put my pinky on the canvas and just kind of hover over it so I don't push too hard and get too much of a vibrant mark. I want a very soft, feathery mark so that it just gives the impression of this blue sky poking through. And now I'm going to speed up the video and just do all the areas in blue. Now once I get to a place where I feel like I've got the basic dry brushing in where I want it to go, I can also go back in and scoop up some of that blue and place it down nice and thick in the middle of some of those dry brushed areas to really set the blue. And of course, you can always dry brush around those edges while they're wet if it looks too stark in the middle of an area, but just to give it some texture, but also because acrylic paint can be a little translucent, especially when you're doing this dry brush technique. Putting a nice thick gob of that color in that spot really will help set that blue and really make it vibrant. And that's true with any color. Whenever I'm dry brushing, even if it's a white gleam on a teacup or something that I want to be really bright in the center, like a glowing light, I'll dry brush around the edges of it, or dry brush the whole thing to start, and then go back in with a nice thick gob of that color right in the middle, just to really help make sure that that color is really reading and really vibrant. I hope this has been helpful. And if you're interested in learning more about acrylic painting, I do have some videos on my channel. Please subscribe. Every so often I'll put new videos on here, but I'm not always the best at it, so I apologize. If you have a question about something that you'd like me to do a little video for, some videos I save for my workshops, and depending on the technique or what it is I'm trying to teach, but I'm always happy to try and make one of these, homemade little videos. They're not very high production value, but they're made with the best of intentions in my studio, and I'd be happy to share my techniques. So feel free to email me or send me a note here on YouTube or any of my social media channels, and I hope to hear from you.